It happened on one of those rainy evenings that seem to pull emotions to the surface whether you're ready for them or not. The sky was gray, the house was unusually quiet, and I had just finished washing the last of the dishes when I heard the soft knock on the living room door. I turned to see her, my stepdaughter, standing there with red eyes and trembling hands. There was something in her look that stopped me cold, something unspoken but heavy. And before I could even ask what was wrong, she walked straight to me, wrapped her arms around my chest and whispered, "Don't let this end." Those 5 words hit harder than anything I was prepared for. They weren't just about that moment. They carried weight, years of memories, unspoken fears, and everything we had been through together as a family. This wasn't the first time life had thrown challenges our way, but this time felt different. This time it wasn't about a missed curfew, a school issue, or even the typical tension that sometimes exists in blended families. No, this was deeper. This was personal. When I first married her mother, my stepdaughter was guarded, quiet, always keeping a little part of herself hidden. I never pushed her. I understood the delicate nature of becoming a step-parent. I respected her boundaries, and slowly over time we built something real. It wasn't forced. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. We shared laughs during game nights, long talks during car rides, and moments of silence that were comforting rather than awkward. So hearing her plead like that, with tears soaking into my shirt, made my heart ache in ways I can't fully explain. But what led to that moment? What happened before she broke down? That's the part that still keeps replaying in my head. The day had started out normal enough. I had picked her up from school like always. We joked around about the usual stuff: music, her upcoming exams, what she wanted for dinner. There were no signs. Nothing out of the ordinary. But underneath it all, something must have been building. A storm gathering inside her that she didn't know how to voice until it was too much. I held her close, trying to offer whatever comfort I could, but I was also trying to piece together what she meant. Don't let this end. Was she talking about her home life? Was it about her mom and me? Or was it something else entirely? Something she hadn't shared yet? Every possibility raced through my mind, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, she needed me now more than ever. That moment left me with questions I couldn't answer. Why was she crying like that? What was she so afraid of losing? And most importantly, how could I protect something if I didn't even know what was at risk? That night changed everything. And what came next, well, nothing could have prepared me for it. She stayed in my arms longer than she usually would. That told me more than words ever could. My stepdaughter had never been the overly emotional type. In fact, she had built walls around herself ever since I first came into her life. I still remember the first time she looked at me without suspicion. It took months. And even then it wasn't trust one saw in her eyes, just cautious acceptance. So now, feeling her cling to me like that, crying softly into my chest, I knew this wasn't just a bad day or some teenage mood swing. This was something real. Something serious. I didn't press her. Not right away. I just sat with her, my hand slowly moving across her back, trying to make her feel safe. Whatever she was battling inside, I didn't want to scare it further into silence. She needed space and I needed patience. But my mind kept racing. Could it be something at school? A fight with her mom? Maybe something happened with one of her friends? Or worse, something she hadn't told either of us before? Her phone buzzed on the couch and she flinched. Not just a normal startle, but like the kind that comes from dread. She didn't reach for it. She didn't even look at it. She just gripped my shirt tighter. That moment said more than anything else that night. The buzzing stopped after a few seconds, but the tension it left behind stayed heavy in the room. I knew better than to check her phone. That trust, whatever we had, would shatter. But I couldn't ignore what I had just seen. I gently leaned back to look at her face, but she buried it deeper into my chest. "Can we just stay like this for a while?" she asked quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper, and there was something so fragile in it, like the wrong word might make her fall apart. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, as long as you need." She didn't say anything else after that. Not for a long time. We sat like that until the rain outside turned into a steady rhythm, tapping against the windows like a soft metronome to her breathing. I could feel it slowly calm down, but I knew the real storm, whatever had shaken her so deeply, was still hidden. My wife was still out running errands, and for once I was glad. If she had walked in just then, questions would have flown too fast, too soon. And whatever fragile thread my stepdaughter had used to reach out to me tonight, it might have snapped. The weirdest part was, I had this feeling in my gut that something had been off for days, maybe even weeks. Little things. A strange silence at dinner. A flicker of fear in her eyes when her phone lit up. The way she flinched whenever someone mentioned school. But I'd brushed it off. Told myself she was just being a teenager. Now I was starting to wonder if I'd missed something important. Something I should have seen coming. But the truth? I still didn't know what she meant by "don't let this end." And the way she held me like I was her last safe place, it scared me. Because what if I couldn't stop whatever was coming? What if it was already too late? The next morning felt quieter than usual. Even the light through the windows seemed dimmer, like the house itself was holding its breath. My stepdaughter hadn't said much after last night. She had eventually fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with a blanket while I sat nearby, keeping watch. I didn't want to leave her alone, not when something so heavy was sitting on her shoulders. I just didn't know what that something was yet. She barely touched her breakfast. She avoided eye contact. And when her mom asked how she slept, she just shrugged and mumbled, "Fine." But it wasn't fine. Anyone could see that, well, maybe not everyone. My wife, God bless her, had a way of looking on the bright side of things. She took our stepdaughter's quiet mood as just another normal teenage phase. But I knew better now. There was a silence around her that wasn't peaceful. It was hiding something. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a chance. We were driving to the store, just the two of us, and the car was filled with that same tense quiet. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to think of the right words. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I said, keeping my voice low. "Whatever it is, I'm here." She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed fixed on the passing streets. Then, almost too soft to hear, she said, "What if it's something that changes everything?" Her voice cracked just a little. "What if you don't see me the same after?" I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. "Nothing you say is going to change how I feel about you," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "Nothing." But she just shook her head and looked away again. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding or teenage drama. This was something deeper. Something she'd been holding on to alone for far too long. And whatever it was, it had convinced her that even I might walk away if I knew the truth. The phone. The flinches. The whispered plea. Asterisk, "Don't let this end." Asterisk, I started to put the pieces together, but they didn't make a clear picture. Not yet. And then there was another layer I hadn't thought about until now. Someone else knew. That text that made her freeze last night. Someone out there was part of this. And maybe they were the reason she couldn't speak freely. I started paying more attention to the little things. Her body language. The friends she stopped mentioning. The way she double-checked the doors before bed. Even her school attendance had quietly dipped a bit, but it hadn't set off alarms before. I guess we were all too distracted to notice. My wife remained unaware. She thought everything was fine. As long as there were no loud arguments, everything must be okay. But I knew we were standing on something fragile, something close to breaking. And I still didn't know what would happen when it did. By the middle of the week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. My stepdaughter had grown even quieter. She moved through the house like a shadow there but never really present. She was always clutching her phone, eyes flickering toward the screen like she was waiting for something. Or dreading it. I watched her more closely now. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew she was silently asking for help and just didn't know how to say the words. That night something changed. She came home from school with her hoodie pulled tight around her face. And she didn't say a word to anyone. She went straight to her room and shut the door. But it was the sound that followed a few minutes later. A muffled sob, not loud but enough to cut through the walls, that made my chest tighten. I hesitated outside her door, unsure whether to knock, unsure whether she wanted space or needed someone right that second. When I finally opened it, she was sitting on the floor, her phone face down beside her, her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were red, and there was no pretending this time. She didn't flinch or turn away. She just looked up at me and whispered, "I think I made it worse." I sat down next to her without saying a word. My presence seemed to give her permission to finally speak, but the words came out slow and shaky. He said if I told anyone, he'd show everyone. That he had proof. But I didn't do anything wrong. I swear. I just wanted him to stop. Her voice broke and her breathing became uneven, like she was trying to hold herself together with threads that kept snapping. My heart sank. I still didn't know exactly who he was, but I understood now that someone had been threatening her, manipulating her into silence. And she'd been carrying this fear around for who knows how long. I reached for her hand and for once she didn't pull away. There was a soft ding from her phone and she froze. Her eyes went straight to it, wide with fear. I picked it up gently and turned the screen so I could read the message. Just a few words. But they were enough to make my blood run cold. Asterisk, you think crying to your stepdad will help? Try me. Asterisk, I stared at the message, heart pounding. It was real. This wasn't in her head. Someone was targeting her. And now they knew she'd said something. I looked at her, saw the panic rising again, and knew we didn't have time to wait or second guess. But we also couldn't rush into anything and make it worse. Whoever was behind this wasn't just bluffing. They had something they were using against her, and they were confident enough to push back the second she reached out. The question now wasn't just how to protect her. It was how far this person had already gone, and what they were willing to do next. I turned the phone over in my hand, my mind racing. The threat was direct, personal, and timed too perfectly. It meant he was watching, maybe not literally outside our window, but close enough to know she had cracked. Close enough to see she wasn't alone anymore. My first instinct was to protect her, to go to the authorities right then and there. But her grip on my arm stopped me. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "If he finds out, it'll get worse." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a kind of fear most people wouldn't recognize. It wasn't just about embarrassment or reputation. This was fear of exposure, fear of being powerless, fear that once the wrong person saw what he had, her world would never be the same. And the way she stared at the phone, frozen in place, told me she believed he'd do it without hesitation. But then something new clicked. I asked her gently, "Do you know him from school?" She hesitated, then gave a slow, painful nod. "But it's not what you think," she said quickly. "He's not even in my grade. He's older. He used to come by when Mom wasn't home." My stomach turned. "Wait. Here. To this house." She nodded again, this time faster. "It started last year. He was friends with someone down the street, always around. At first it was normal, he'd help with homework sometimes or just talk. But then he started saying things. Sending messages. I didn't even know how he got my number at first." Every word out of her mouth added another layer to the storm that was building. This wasn't just online manipulation. This wasn't someone hiding behind a screen. He had been here. He had gotten into her world by acting safe, by slipping past all our defenses like he belonged. And we hadn't seen it. Then came the second blow. "I think he might have something from inside the house," she whispered. "I thought I left my iPad in my backpack last month, but I found it under my bed turned off. The camera was cracked like someone stepped on it. And I never even told anyone because I thought maybe I dropped it. But now—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The weight of what she was saying sat between us like a third person in the room. If he had recordings, if he had found a way to watch her in the one place she was supposed to be safe, then this was bigger than anything we thought. And if that was the case, he wasn't just threatening her with messages anymore. He was holding her life hostage with something worse. That changed everything. This wasn't just about helping her through fear anymore. It was about protecting her from someone who had crossed the line completely. Someone who thought he could get away with it because no one would believe her, or care enough to stop him. He was wrong. But what worried me now was just how far he had already gone. And how far he was still willing to go. That night I didn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me sit up straight. Every flicker of headlights outside made me peek through the blinds. My stepdaughter stayed close, barely speaking, but something had changed. Now that the secret was out, she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. That mattered. But we both knew it wasn't over. The phone sat between us on the table, silent for hours. Too silent. Like the calm before a final strike. By morning, I made the decision. I told my wife everything. At first, she didn't understand. She looked at me, confused, as if I was speaking in code. But when she saw our daughter's face, when she saw how tightly she held my hand as I explained the messages and the iPad, something in her broke too. The denial faded. What came next was fear. And then anger. She wanted to go to the police immediately. So did I. But we needed proof. More than texts. We needed something he couldn't twist or deny. So I set a trap. With my stepdaughter's hesitant permission, we staged a message. She replied to him for the first time in days. "I'm home alone. No one knows anything." I hated every word of it, but we needed him to believe it. Within minutes he responded. "I'll come by. Tonight. You know the drill." My stomach turned. We hid cameras in the hallway and set up an old phone to record near the front door. Then we waited. The tension was unbearable. Every tick of the clock felt louder than the last. My wife stayed upstairs, phone in hand, ready to call the police the second he appeared. At 8:13 p.m. the doorbell rang. My heart stopped. He looked exactly how I remembered, too confident, too calm. He smiled like he belonged there. But this time, instead of my stepdaughter answering the door, I did. His face changed instantly. I thought she's not alone," I said. "And you're not going anywhere." Behind me, my wife stepped into view, holding up her phone, already dialing. "Everything you've sent, everything you've said, it's recorded. You're done." His cocky expression crumbled. For a second, he looked like a scared kid. But then, just before turning to run, he muttered, "It's not just me. You don't know what you've started." Those words stuck with me. Not just me. Police arrived minutes later and took him in. My stepdaughter watched from the upstairs landing, hands trembling, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in weeks: relief. The footage, the messages, the iPad, we handed everything over. It was enough. He was charged and she was safe. But the twist came weeks later, after things started to feel normal again. A package arrived in the mail. No return address. Just our family name, written in messy handwriting. Inside, a flash drive. And a note. He was just one of many. My stepdaughter looked at me, pale. "It's not over," she whispered. And deep down I knew she was right. I stared at the flash drive in my hand, the small note still crumpled beside it. My wife stood behind me, arms crossed tightly, like she was bracing for whatever truth might come next. My stepdaughter didn't say anything, but her eyes didn't leave that flash drive for a second. We all knew this wasn't just some leftover threat. It meant there was more to uncover, more to face. But we weren't in the dark anymore, and that made all the difference. We gave the flash drive straight to the authorities. We didn't look at it ourselves. After everything we'd already seen, we agreed some things were better left to those trained to handle it. The police later confirmed it contained messages, videos, and digital records that connected not just the boy who had been harassing her, but a small group who had been targeting girls through private networks at school and nearby neighborhoods. It was sickening. But that single act, my stepdaughter coming forward, had broken something wide open. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She helped stop something bigger than any of us imagined. In the weeks that followed, our home started to feel like a home again. We still kept the lights on longer than usual. We still checked the doors twice. But little by little, she began to smile again. She started talking more. Her shoulders weren't always tensed up, and she wasn't constantly looking over them. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but it stopped controlling her. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, just watching the sky fade from orange to blue, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever feel okay again." I looked at her and said the only thing that felt true. "You're stronger than you know. And no one's ever taking your peace again." There were still court dates and interviews, school meetings, and long conversations with counselors. But through all of it, she never backed down. She became a voice for others who hadn't spoken up yet. Some of her classmates came forward, and so did a few parents who realized their daughters had also been keeping secrets out of fear. It wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about healing. As for our family, something changed forever during all of this. Before, I had always wondered if she really saw me as more than her stepdad. But after everything, there was no question. The trust we built came from something raw and real. And now when she calls me Dad, I know it isn't out of habit. It's because I stood by her when she needed me the most. So when people ask why I tell this story, I tell them it's not just about what happened. It's about what it taught us. About being present, listening closely, and never underestimating the quiet signs. It's about knowing that even in silence, someone might be crying for help. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply not let go.